In the corridors of official history, there are names that are best spoken in whispers. Names that send a shiver down the spine of academics and make them hastily change the subject. One of these names is Giovanni Battista Piranesi. The moment you mention this Italian master, the familiar, neat picture of the past begins to crumble before your very eyes. Why? Because his works are not just art. They are a challenge that official science can neither accept nor ignore. They are too precise, too vast, and too inconvenient for those who write the history books. Imagine engravings created in the mid-18th century. They don't depict pastoral landscapes or portraits of nobility. They show the ruins of cyclopean structures, the remains of colossal vaults, and staircases and arches reaching for the sky, as if built for a civilization of titans. Next to these architectural monsters, the artist often depicted tiny human figures, not to bring the scene to life, but purely for scale. And this scale is crushing. Against the backdrop of these structures, a human figure looks like an ant at the foot of a mountain, a random, insignificant guest in a world that never belonged to him. Historians rushed to find a convenient explanation for this phenomenon. They called them architectural fantasies, the creations of a brilliant artist's imagination. This label, like many others, was designed with one goal in mind: to convince the viewer that none of this is serious, that it is merely fiction. It's a comfortable position that allows one to avoid asking lichnych, dangerous questions. But the longer you look at these works, the stronger the doubt becomes. The detail is astonishing. The perspective is flawless. The composition is so complex and precise that it seems to have been created not by a human hand, but captured by the lens of some device. If these are not drawings, but real images of long-vanished cities, then our entire timeline, all our ideas about the capabilities of ancient civilizations are a lie. Piranesi was born in 1720 to the family of a simple stonemason. It would seem his origins promised nothing out of the ordinary. Yet it was he, a man who knew stone firsthand, who left us the most compelling evidence of a world carefully hidden from us. It was as if he was trying to cry out to future generations, to record what he saw with his own eyes, and to do it in a way that could never be erased or rewritten. The main question that arises when looking at his legacy is simple and, at the same time, terrifying. Could a man of the 18th century, armed with only a stylus and a plate, have invented such things? Or was he, centuries ahead of his time, merely documenting what could still be seen among the ruins of a once great and now vanished world? This question is the starting point of an investigation that could change everything. To understand the depth of this mystery, you must mentally immerse yourself in the world of his works. These are not just images of buildings. This is a journey into another reality, where the laws of physics and human capabilities were different. The viewer is confronted with interconnecting halls stretching into infinity, their vaults lost in the darkness at an unreachable height. Stone bridges thrown across chasms are so wide that an entire army could march across them. Staircases ascend at impossible angles, leading not to the next floor, but seemingly to other dimensions. Columns, more like ancient sequoias, prop up the sky. Against the backdrop of this monumental, overwhelming architecture, the human figure is not the measure of all things, but merely a tiny, barely noticeable dot. A casual observer of a greatness that is beyond his control and comprehension. The official version suggests we consider these images as fantasies, architectural daydreams. We are told that Piranesi, being an architect, was simply playing with forms and scales, creating imaginary, idealized, or grotesque views of Rome. This is a convenient and safe interpretation that turns a potentially dangerous historical document into a harmless work of art. But this version crumbles at the first serious question. If this is all just a flight of fancy, why does he so insistently depict not creation, but decay? His engravings are not a hymn to greatness, but to catastrophe. The arches are collapsed, the foundations have sunk deep beneath meters of earth and sand, and trees grow through the cracks in the stonework. He wasn't painting a dream. He was documenting the aftermath with the meticulousness of a forensic expert. This is not a fantasy. It is a report from the scene of a grand incident, stretched out over time. The key piece of evidence against the fantasy theory lies in the very method the master chose. He worked in the etching technique, a type of engraving on metal. This is an incredibly difficult, slow, and unforgiving process. First, a copper plate is coated with an acid-resistant varnish. Then the artist scratches through the varnish with a fine needle to create the drawing. After that, the plate is submerged in nitric acid, which eats away the metal in the exposed lines. Any mistake is fatal. It's almost impossible to correct. It's a battle with metal, demanding colossal patience, a steady hand, and precise calculation. Why would a person who merely wants to capture his fleeting fantasies choose such a difficult and irreversible path? He could have drawn on paper, quickly, easily, like everyone else. But he chose copper. It was as if he wanted his images to survive the centuries, so that no one could erase, correct, or declare them forgeries. This choice was not an artist's whim, but an archivist's calculation. He sealed his testimony in a metal time capsule, seeking to preserve not the beauty of fiction, but the incorruptible truth he saw with his own eyes. This was not art for art's sake. It was a mission to save the memory of a world that was meant to be forgotten. If the previous arguments might have seemed like near philosophical reflections, the cold, hard numbers of statistics leave no room for interpretation. Official biography claims that during his creative life, Piranesi produced over 1,500 engravings. At first glance, this number might not impress a modern person accustomed to the digital speed of image creation. But let's return to the realities of the 18th century and remember what etching is. It's not a pencil sketch that can be whipped up in a couple of hours. It's a grueling, multi-stage technical process. Preparing the copper plate, polishing it, applying the acid-resistant ground, painstakingly scratching a mirror image with a needle, etching in the toxic fumes of nitric acid, making test prints, correcting, and re-etching. Creating one large, detailed plate could take a master months of strenuous labor, costing him his eyesight and his health. Now let's compare the facts. Piranesi didn't just engrave. He conducted active archaeological excavations, measured buildings, wrote theoretical treatises, managed his own workshop, and even took on architectural commissions. Where did one man, with the same 24 hours in a day, find the time to create 1,500 complex matrices? If you divide this number by the years of his active career, it turns out he would have had to produce a new finished engraving almost every single week, without breaks for sleep, food, or other activities. This is physically impossible for a person working by hand with traditional tools. Such inhuman productivity is more reminiscent of a well-oiled machine, an assembly line for producing images, rather than the work of a lone visionary artist. The oddities don't end there. The fate of the copper plates themselves, these original matrices, raises even more questions. Usually, after a master's passing, his plates are distributed among his students, sold to publishers, or even melted down. But in Piranesi's case, something extraordinary happened. His legacy did not dissolve into private collections. Every single matrix was centrally purchased and moved to Rome, where, under the direct patronage of the Vatican, a special calcographia was established. an institute whose main purpose was to store these specific works. This looks less like a concern for art and more like an operation to remove important documents from public circulation. Why such secrecy and centralization around simple fantasies? One gets the impression that a powerful structure sought to establish total control over the primary sources, so that no outsider could study them too closely, as if these copper sheets contained information that could not be entrusted to the general public, information capable of shaking the very foundations of the established world order. And perhaps they had good reason to be afraid, because if we assume that Piranesi could not have created such a volume of work by hand, we inevitably arrive at the conclusion that a technology existed which accelerated the process tenfold. A technology that was not supposed to be officially known in the 18th century. The answer to this riddle may be hidden on the very surface of these copper plates, in microscopic details that went unnoticed for centuries, but which have the power to completely overturn our understanding of past technological progress. This is evidence that transforms the history of art into a history of forgotten high technology. The key to this mystery has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, etched into the very structure of the metal from which his masterpieces are made. The answer was only waiting for the invention of a tool capable of looking deep into the lines and strokes, a powerful microscope. When 21st century researchers finally aimed their optics at Piranesi's original copper plates, they expected to see anything. Traces of skillful toolwork, perhaps some unique authorial techniques. But what they found did not fit into any existing theory of art history. In manual engraving, when a master scratches through varnish or cuts into metal with a sharp tool, characteristic V-shaped or triangular grooves are left on the surface. Their depth and width always vary slightly because a human hand, even the most brilliant one, cannot move with the mechanical precision of a robot. These microscopic irregularities are the master's handwriting, his unique signature. But on Piranesi's engravings there is nothing of the sort. Under high magnification, a shock awaited the researchers. Instead of uneven grooves, they saw perfectly uniform, tiny round dots, evenly covering the entire surface of the image. Such structures physically cannot be created by the mechanical action of a needle or a burin. They are the telltale sign of a completely different process, a photochemical one. This kind of dotted pattern arises in only one case, when a surface coated with a light-sensitive substance is exposed to light. This compound, known today as photoresist, changes its properties under the action of light. It either polymerizes or, conversely, becomes soluble. After exposure, the plate is treated with a reagent that washes away the unexposed or exposed areas, bearing the metal. And only then does acid etch perfectly uniform microscopic pits into these exposed dots. This is the basic principle of photolithography, a technology that, we are assured, only appeared in the 19th century. And here, a device known since antiquity enters the stage, the camera obscura. Historians admit that artists of the Renaissance and later eras used this dark box with an aperture or lens to project an image onto canvas or paper. But they insist that it went no further than simply tracing the outlines with a pencil. But what if Piranesi went further? What if he knew a chemical composition capable of fixing this light projection? In that case, the whole process becomes frighteningly logical. He didn't spend months hunched over a single plate, straining his eyes and risking a fatal mistake. He simply brought his camera obscura to the site of the ruins, placed a copper plate coated with a light-sensitive varnish inside, and opened the lens. The light itself did all the work, transferring the image onto the metal with photographic accuracy. After that, all that was left was to etch the plate with acid. This explains everything: his phenomenal productivity, the perfect perspective, and the incredible detail. This is exactly how the word photography was born. Light writing, from the Greek roots photos, light, and grapho, to write. Now let's recall the official name for Piranesi's technique: chalcography, literally writing on copper, from chalkos, copper, and grapho, to write. Doesn't it seem that these are two names for the same process? Only in one case the emphasis is on the medium, and in the other on the active force? Perhaps the term chalcography was invented specifically to mask the true nature of the technology, to hide the very fact that light was used to create images. Piranesi ceases to be just an artist. He becomes the operator of a complex technical device, a person who possessed a technology that would officially appear only a century later. He did not draw. He documented. He wasn't just an artist. He was a photographer, capturing a world that no longer exists. When the veil of technological secrecy is lifted, we are faced with the next, even more unsettling question. If Piranesi was not inventing, but was capturing reality with photographic precision, then what exactly did he see around him in 18th century Italy? His engravings are not sketches of ancient monuments in their tourist-friendly, cleaned-up state. They are a panorama of total destruction, a report from the scene of a global catastrophe, frozen in time. What he captured are not the signs of slow decay and aging, but the consequences of a single, monstrously powerful impact. Look closely at the details of his works, and you will see not just ruins, but the silent testimony of an apocalypse. The columns aren't merely cracked with age. They are snapped in half like giant matchsticks. The vaults have not crumbled. They have caved in huge sections, as if from a monstrous explosion or an impact from above. Entire buildings stand tilted, shifted from their foundations, which in turn have sunk many meters under layers of clay, sand, and cultural debris. This is not the result of wars or local earthquakes. The pattern of destruction is too consistent and widespread. It looks more like the aftermath of the use of a weapon of incredible destructive power, or a global cataclysm that changed the very landscape of the planet. In many engravings, we see the first floors and even entire levels of magnificent structures buried underground. People of the 18th century are walking on the tops of ancient arches that once soared at dizzying heights. Future archaeologists will call this a cultural layer, but Piranesi's works show that this is not the result of the gradual accumulation of debris. These are the traces of a flood, a mudflow, or a planetary-scale dust storm that, in a short period, deposited meters of soil, burying entire cities. He methodically documents a world trying to recover from shock. And against this backdrop of total devastation, another battle unfolds. A quiet and inexorable one. Nature is slowly but surely reclaiming its territory. Bushes sprout from cracks in marble slabs. The powerful roots of trees like tentacles tear apart the stonework from within. Ivy covers the remains of walls in a green shroud, and entire groves grow on the roofs of former palaces and temples. This creates a strange, almost surreal feeling. It's as if Piranesi captured the last days of Pompeii, stretched out over centuries. He shows us a civilization that did not just disappear, but was wiped from the face of the earth, and now nature is mercifully concealing the traces of this tragedy. A persistent image is formed of a world that has survived an end of days. Small groups of survivors huddle among the ruins, using them as quarries or temporary shelters. They seem lost, not understanding the true purpose and scale of the structures surrounding them. They live on the fragments of former greatness, like ants in an abandoned human house. But if this is a post-catastrophic world, who were its masters before? Who erected these unimaginable structures? Whose will and genius are behind this titanic architecture? Looking at these engravings, it becomes clear that the civilization that created all this possessed technologies and knowledge that surpass even our modern capabilities. And the most important question is, where did it disappear to, and what caused its demise? The answer, perhaps, lies in the very scale of these buildings. When the initial shock of realizing Piranesi's technological level and the scale of the catastrophe he captured subsides, an even more fundamental and disturbing question comes to the forefront. Who were these cities built for? A close analysis of the proportions of the buildings in his engravings makes it clear that they were designed and constructed not for people of our stature. This is not just a guess, but a conclusion based on direct visual evidence. Doorways tens of meters high, which a giraffe could walk through freely. Stair steps, each one reaching a person's waist or even chest, making them almost impossible for an ordinary person to climb. Window openings that look more like triumphal arches. Ceilings lost at such a height that any light source available in that era would have simply dissipated before reaching the floor. This is not hyperbole or artistic exaggeration. It is a consistently applied architectural standard that runs like a red thread through all of his works. The furniture, if any is depicted, is of the same cyclopean dimensions. The sarcophagi and vases he drew are so large that a person next to them looks like a child. All these elements combine into a single, consistent picture of a world inhabited by beings whose average height was several times ours. The people in Piranesi's engravings are not the builders or the masters of these structures. They look like later, secondary settlers who arrived to find everything ready and are trying to adapt this alien, incomprehensible heritage to their own needs. They are Lilliputians in a land of giants. The idea of a race of giants existing in the past may seem fantastic, a product of myths and legends. But what if these myths are not fiction, but a distorted echo of real events? Surprisingly, Piranesi's evidence does not stand alone. He merely documented in stone what other artists tried to tell with paint. Take, for example, his compatriot, Giulio Romano, the brilliant student of Raphael himself. In one of the halls of the Palazzo del Te in Mantua, he created a fresco that is striking in its dynamism and tragedy. The Fall of the Giants. We are told that this is merely an allegory, an illustration of an ancient Greek myth. But look at it not as a fairy tale, but as a historical chronicle. We see not an abstract battle, but a scene of total annihilation. Giant, but quite human-like beings flee in terror under the rubble of a collapsing temple. From the heavens, lightning bolts and the punishing power of the Olympian gods rain down upon them. This is not a myth. This is a depiction of war, of genocide, in which one race exterminates another, using superior technologies that in ancient times could have been perceived as divine. And this theme of a global conflict between civilizations is reflected in the most ancient texts around the world. The ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata, is not just a collection of moral tales. It is a detailed description of a great war, in which weapons were used that are strikingly similar in their characteristics to nuclear weapons. The texts speak of flashes as bright as 1,000 suns, of water that became poisonous, of people whose hair and nails fell out, and of entire cities wiped off the face of the earth with a single blow. The epic speaks directly of a war between gods and asuras, titans, during which flying machines called vimanas and weapons of unprecedented power were used. If you connect these seemingly disparate fragments, Piranesi's engravings, Romano's frescoes, and the texts of the Mahabharata, a remarkably coherent and logical picture emerges. Perhaps a highly advanced civilization of giants once did exist on Earth, and it was destroyed in a global war with another, possibly extraterrestrial civilization that possessed even more advanced technologies. And what we call myths and, quote, architectural fantasies are merely the last surviving fragments of memory about that world and the catastrophe that destroyed it. Now that all the pieces of the puzzle are on the table, A picture of the past emerges that is so different from the accepted version that it is capable of shaking the very foundations of our worldview. These are no longer scattered hypotheses or isolated oddities. This is a coherent, logical, and frighteningly realistic version of events. A worldview in which humanity is not the pinnacle of creation, but just one of many civilizations. One that has replaced a previous, far more powerful, and tragically lost one. Let's put it all together. On Earth, in the distant past, there existed a civilization of beings we might call giants or titans. They possessed not only immense stature, as evidenced by the megalithic structures they left behind, but also a supreme level of technological development. They knew how to work stone with a precision we cannot match, to erect structures that defy the laws of gravity, and, most importantly, they possessed technologies based on light and chemistry that our civilization officially rediscovered only in the 19th and 20th centuries. Their cities, whose ruins Piranesi so meticulously documented, were the pinnacle of engineering and architectural thought. But this great civilization did not fade away gradually. It was destroyed. The evidence left to us by artists and ancient texts speaks not of a natural decline, but of a swift and total catastrophe. Was it a war with another, perhaps extraterrestrial race, as the frescoes of Giulio Romano and the Mahabharata epic hint? Or was it an internal conflict in which weapons of a planetary scale were used? We don't know for sure, but we see the result of this event in every one of Piranesi's engravings. Broken columns, caved-in vaults, cities buried under meters of mud and ash. This was the last day of the old world, a reset point after which the planet's history took a completely different course. In this light, the role of Giovanni Battista Piranesi and other masters like him is seen in a completely different way. They were not fantasists or dreamers. They were the last witnesses. They lived in an era when the scars of the catastrophe were still everywhere, not yet completely hidden under layers of earth and new vegetation. They were the chroniclers, the archivists of a lost world. Using a technology that was itself a fragment of the knowledge of a former age, Piranesi fulfilled his mission. He created an imperishable archive, a visual library of memory. His copper plates are not works of art in the usual sense. They are historical documents of the highest importance, reports from the scene of the greatest tragedy in Earth's history. And it's no wonder that official structures were so eager to take control of this legacy, because it contains a truth that is far too inconvenient. That truth is that our history, as we know it from textbooks, is a lie. Or more accurately, a heavily edited and shortened version. It is the history of a civilization that grew up on ruins, without realizing or acknowledging the greatness of those who came before. We learn the dates of battles and the names of kings, but we don't ask why structures are scattered all over the planet that we can neither replicate nor even fully understand. If everything you have learned is true, then what is our real past? Who are we in this new, unwritten timeline? Are we the heirs of the great, or just random settlers on a planet that has survived a terrible war? These questions strip us of our comfortable certainty in our own greatness, and force us to look at the world with completely different eyes. You will have to search for the answers yourself, because official science will remain silent until the very end. The investigation is just beginning.